Hey guys, Aubrey Whitfield here, and today I want to walk through one of my favourite plugins ever, and it is the Pultec EQP-1A EQ. So this is an analog based EQ plugin, and this is the universal audio one, and there's a few companies that model this unit, but this is my favourite one, the universal audio one. I started using this EQ some years ago, and I would have to say that it's probably the one plugin that made my mixes sound more professional and just better instantly. You know, there was like little effort in order to get a really good sound out of it. So it is probably one of the best investments I've made in terms of plugins. So I just want to kind of show you guys how you can use it and how you can get the best out of it, because it can be quite confusing when you look at the controls and it's not quite obvious what they do and how they correlate with each other. So first of all, this is a tonal EQ, right? Okay, so it's not something that you would use for surgical purposes, you know, such as fixing problematic frequencies in your mix. For problematic frequencies, you know, whether it's sibilance or a muddy low end, whatever it may be, or frequencies that are popping out, you use your surgical EQ for that, and I like to use the FabFilter Pro Q3, so that would be more of my narrow cuts and boosts like so. But with the tonal EQ, it is based on an analog hardware unit, and you can find the Pultec EQP-1A going right back through history as one of the most used EQ hardware units on hit records, and you know, for good reason. And that's why so many companies have done emulations of this brilliant unit. So for me, the tonal EQs go last in my vocal chain, they go last in my master bus chains, my drum bus chain, so it's always last, and I use it to tone shape for a lot of things, but also to add some of that lovely analog colour. Now, a couple of things to know about the EQP-1A. So the first thing is that we can only control the low end and the high end. So if we take a look here at the controls, we've got the low end here, and then we have got controls for the high end, or kind of the lower high end, and then these two controls here control the higher end frequencies. So we can't control the mids with this plugin, and that's why there is a different Pultec plugin for that, and it is the Pultec MEQ-5. So I like to use these two plugins in conjunction with each other, and I tend to have this one first in the chain to kind of deal with the mids, and that's where you get a lot of power and richness in your mix, because this is just great, the MEQ-5, on things like vocals, pianos, guitars, you know, things that need a lot of body and richness to them in those mid frequencies. This kind of adds a lot of power, and then adding the EQP-1A after the MEQ-5 just to kind of add a bit of smoothness to the low end, and also add some top end smoothness and bite to those higher frequencies. So if we just kind of take a look at this, because this is the best way of kind of explaining how the controls work, because as I said before, it's not always obvious what is going on. So let's just go over it very briefly. So here in the bottom three controls, if we take a look here at CPS, this is basically an acronym for hertz. So this is cycles per second. So we've got 20 hertz, 30 hertz, 60 hertz, and 100 hertz. Okay, so like the super low end. And what we can do is we can use this control here to boost these frequencies. So, you know, we could take this up to 2, and we would at the moment be boosting 30 hertz by 2 decibels, although it's not quite 2 decibels, but I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have a 10, which basically stands for attenuation, which basically means cut. So if we wanted to cut those frequencies instead, we'd take this control up, and then we'd be cutting 30 hertz by, say, 2 decibels. So, very, very easy, this section, just controlling that low end, and just to kind of make sure everyone's on the same page. If I get out my surgical EQ again and then bring out the Pultec as a comparison, so we've got here these low frequencies controlling 20, 30, 60, 100. So if you just want to kind of visualize where that is on your surgical EQ, we've got 20 here and we go up to 100 here. So we're basically controlling the frequencies between here. Then as we kind of move up, we've got these 3 controls here which are kind of married to each other. So we have the KCS, which stands for kilohertz in modern terms. This is kilocycles per second. So we have 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 12, 16 kilohertz. So again, if we kind of look at our surgical EQ, we're going from 3 up to 16. So roughly around here, up to roughly around there. So these frequencies here. And slight difference with the controls here, which can be confusing. So we've got a boost control. So we can only boost these frequencies. We can't attenuate them. So we would use this boost control to boost, as it's set at the minute on this picture, 8 kilohertz. So we're boosting 8 kilohertz by 3 decibels. And as I said, there's no attenuation there, so we can't cut any of these frequencies. Also, this bandwidth control here, you might be tricked into thinking that this controls both the low end and the high ends, but it doesn't. This bandwidth control is just for these frequencies here, 3 to 16. It doesn't affect these low end frequencies. And we've got sharp here and we've got broad. So this is basically our Q, which stands for quality factor. So it's how sharp or how broad our cut or boost will be. Now again, if you think of a surgical EQ, we would say that a sharp cut would be something like this. That means fairly sharp, and wide, broad. It could be a range of different things, but it's fairly broad, right? The thing is with the Pultec is that just built in to the plugin, sharp is still fairly broad. Broad to the point where if you were to say boost a frequency here, like it's set at 30 hertz, you would be effectively boosting the frequencies up to 1 kilohertz. So that's really, really broad. So I mean, we're talking like going from 30 down here and affecting up to 1 kilohertz. I mean, it's so broad, it's crazy. There you go. It's like that broad. And that's the other thing to say about the EQP-1A, is that it's just based on shelf filters. So this is a shelf filter. If we look in our surgical EQ, and as you can see, a shelf filter affects a broad range of frequencies. That's why the sharp Q is still fairly broad in the Pultec. So yeah, it affects quite a large amount of frequencies, but it doesn't get rid of them completely like you would with a high pass filter or a low pass filter. And so yeah, we have a low shelf cut in the Pultec, which is these here, and then the high shelf ones up at this end. So you can see that shelves filters are fairly broad anyway, and that's what you'd expect really with a tonal EQ, because as I said, you don't use the tonal EQs really for those really intricate technical cuts and boosts. You're using it for tone shaping, and so you want more broader cuts and boosts. So yeah, if you were to set your bandwidth you know, over here at 1 or 2, for example, thinking it's going to be quite a sharp cut, a sharp boost. Well, it's not. It's going to be, you know, fairly broad. So you have to kind of use your ears. Now, if you went all the way over to 10 broad, your boost there is going to be quite considerable, affecting a whole range of frequencies. For me, I tend to, you know, sit the bandwidth usually around 3 to 4 and just kind of tweak it from there. So the other controls that we have here are the A10 and the A10 cell. And, you know, some people get confused with what these do, and I did when I was starting out as well. So, you know, we can only boost these frequencies here. Up here, we can only cut the super high frequencies. So 5 kilohertz, 10 kilohertz, and 20 kilohertz. Now, between 10 and 20 kilohertz is where your air frequency sits. So, you know, adding that bit of breathy airness to vocals, or adding, you know, high-end air to mixes, for example. So again, attenuation basically means cut. So we can only cut these super high frequencies by turning up the control. So that is how those controls work, and it's good to kind of visualize it with these these lines here to kind of separate them. So just think of it like this: we've got 3, then 3, and then 2 in the right, and they just work with each other. They don't cross over and work with any of the other controls. Now, the other thing that I mentioned about the Pultec is you would think that by going to a boost of 1, you would be boosting that frequency by 1 decibel, but it's not quite true. It's a little bit more than that. So on a Pultec, when you are boosting 1 dB on here actually equals 1.13 decibels. So you're actually boosting a little bit more than what you are seeing. So, you know, by boosting 1 here, yeah, I'm actually boosting 1.13. So a bit louder than what you might be seeing. So you need to be aware of that. And the cutting is slightly different, the attenuation. So a 1 dB cut, for example, equates to a 1.1 decibel cut. So not much more than the 1 decibel, but still it's a bit more than you might be expecting. And also to be aware is that with the Pultecs, if you just kind of loaded this in your DAW and you didn't, you know, add any boost or cuts, these were all at 0, you would still be adding gain to whatever instrument this was on, because the Pultec has a boost built into it, and it is around around 1 decibel, just over 1 decibel boost. So you are automatically adding gain to your mix just by loading this plugin up. And there's that theory, isn't there, that louder sounds better, and you know, that's louder does sound better. So you might be fooled into thinking when you load this up onto your vocal or whatever it may be, that the vocals sound instantly better because it's added a dB or so of gain. And so it's something to be aware of. Now, especially if you have to consider gain staging, etc. in your mix. What I tend to do then when I load up the Pultec is I just take this control here, which is essentially the volume, and I just nudge it a bit to around 11 o'clock, therefore taking the gain down by about 1 decibel, just to kind of even out that volume boost that the plugin brings just by loading it, just so then I can get an accurate perception of what colour is being brought by this plugin, and I'm not being fooled by that gain. I said, you know, a decibel gain or so is not too much, but you know, these small gains, if you had this plugin loaded on so many different instruments in your DAW, you can imagine all the gain that is going to add as a whole to your mix. So that's what I like to do. I like to start by taking that down. Now, generally speaking, what I also find is that, I mean, this is more a perception rather than, you know, scientific fact, but, you know, I've talked about that how I boost let's say I boost 100 hertz, so you know the bass end and the kick. If I boost it by, you know, again, let's do the 1 dB example. I'm actually boosting a bit louder than 1 dB. I'm boosting 1.13 decibels. But I do find that each step that I take the control round, it just has a big difference on the sound. Like these boosts are quite noticeable, shall we say. So the point I'm getting at is that a little goes a long way. That going all the way up here to 10 is something that I rarely do myself. I tend to find that, you know, 2 to 3 dBs boosts or cuts tend to get really good results. So it's just something to consider, because I find that the controls are really powerful. And I've mentioned that, you know, the bandwidth, so the Q, you know, how broad or narrow the cuts and boosts are, it's already quite broad because they are shelf filters within this. So, you know, don't expect real sharp cuts and boosts over here. And if we go too broad, then you're going to affect a whole range of mega frequencies. So for me, I start around there. So this is turning now into my starting preset for this. And so, you know, you can see I've taken this down by 1 decibel. I've put my bandwidth between 3 and 4. I like to start with around 60 hertz on the low end with a 2 dB boost. That is because a lot of the core energy of a kick drum sits between 60 to 80 hertz. So just by putting that on there, you know, I might, you know, if I'm using it on, for example, a kick drum, this would be a great starting point to have it as 60. So I just like to kind of start with bass and kicks, you know, around here. And then if I was perhaps doing vocals, I mean, obviously it depends massively on the vocal that you are working on, but it might look something like this. So going up to 100 and attenuating by about 2 to get rid of some of that low end mud that we don't often need in the vocals, whether male or female. And then I find that you get a lot of presence in the vocals with this plugin between 3, 4 and 5 kilohertz, you know, particularly around 3 or 4. So boosting by about 3 dB, around 3 or 4, can really bring out, you know, that clear presence and clarity in vocals. And of course, if anything gets, you know, a little bit too shrill in a guitar or piano or cymbals or whatever it may be, using the attenuation cell up here by cutting some of those air frequencies can also work wonders. Okay, so the other one to look at, as I mentioned, is the MEQ-5. And this deals with the mid frequencies because, you know, as you can see, we've only got the low end and the high end on the Pultec EQP-1A. So this has a slightly different tone to it, but that's because it's dealing with the mids, and the mids are powerful, really powerful. And this can really add that richness and warmth and just lushness, if you like, to certain instruments. But I find it particularly good on vocals, guitars and pianos. So it's a bit easier to understand this one because we've only got 3 bands to deal with. But what we have, so we've got here peak, peak and dip. So we've got here on the left 200 hertz up to 1000, which is basically 1 kilohertz. So we can boost any of those frequencies by selecting them. So we could boost by 700 like so. And then if we go over here to the far right to the other peak, we can boost any of these frequencies, 1.5 kilohertz up to 5. So it does start to cross over into the Pultec area because they've, you know, we've also got a 3, 4, 5 on there. So that's also something to be aware of. And then we've got dip. So the dip in the middle is basically frequencies that you can cut. So we use the dip control in which to do that. And we've got quite a range to pick from. You know, we start at 200. So not far finishing where the EQP-1A finishes off. and then we can go right round through the mids up to quite a high 7 kilohertz, and so we can dip any of those frequencies, which is handy because, as I said, with these frequencies here, 3 to 16 on the EQP-1A, we don't have a attenuation control, so we can't cut the frequencies on this, but we can on the MEQ-5. So if you want to cut the frequencies on here, but you can't, get out your MEQ-5 and go to the dip section and select the frequencies that you want to dip. I mean, you know, a lot of the time, actually, I might not even reach for the MEQ-5 because, particularly if I'm doing master bus processing, I find that when I've already done a mix, you know, I've done a lot of work on the mids anyway to make it sound balanced. And a lot of the time I just want a bit of smoothness of the low end and a little bit of brightness on top. So the EQP-1A does that perfectly. However, if my mix is sounding a bit hollow or it's lacking a bit of power and richness in those mids, it can be a really, really powerful plugin to load up. Let's just listen to it on this instrumental mix that I've got. So we'll set it like this, like I had before, so between 3 and 4. We'll take the volume, well, actually for now I'll keep the volume on 0 so you can you know, hear the impact, and let's just play and have a listen. Okay, so I'll start messing with some controls here. Let's try boosting this kick. You see what I mean? If you push it too far, it distorts already. It's powerful. Okay. If we go down to 60, actually sounds, the bass sounds better. Turn it off. Off and on again. Off. Off again. Listen to that. That low end just sounds smoother. Now, bearing in mind as well, I am boosting 4 kilohertz here by 3 decibels, and that's making an impact. But let's see if we can maybe get a bit more air out of it. So let's move this around. I'll turn up the boost a bit more. Now, this can be a good way to kind of hear the impact of this plugin on your mix, is turn up the boost or the cut, the attenuation, to really hear the impact, but it might distort, so you've got to be careful. Like that 12 kilohertz, it added a bit of a so if I take it down to 0, you can hear how duller it sounds now. Take it round. Now there is a with the original hardware unit, the Pultec, there is advice that you really shouldn't boost and attenuate controls at the same time because they cancel each other out. But in fact, as Universal Audio advise themselves, that's not necessarily true, because on here we know that boosting at 1 decibel equals 1.3 decibels really, and cutting equals about 1.1 decibels. So actually you are boosting and cutting at different volumes, so that means they don't quite cancel each other out when you use them at the same time. So you could ask yourself, well, why on earth would you want to boost at 3 and then do a cut? And the answer is that I, to be honest, don't do it very often, but I find it just gives a bit more of a subtle result, so it kind of softens the sound. But you know, I'd only do that if you know, I was doing serious tone shaping, but for, you know, most of the time just using either 1 or the other will get you the result that you need. So let's just kind of turn this on and off and do an A/B comparison. So this is it with the Pultec off. Let's bring it on. Wow. And again, off. Now, to me, that sounds tons better with just that single plug-in. It sounds more professional. It sounds more commercial. It's added a lovely tone to the low end and a lovely tone to the upper end. Now, remember what I said about that trap of things sounding better because they're louder. Be aware of that, because I've boosted, 3+ decibels at 60 and 6+ decibels at 12 kilohertz. That's added volume to the sound. And also remember that we add gain to this this whole mix just by adding the Pultec with that 1 dB plus boost. So again, just turning that down a little bit just to help us balance things out. So this is where you can make a real accurate judgment of the colour that this plugin is bringing and the effect on your mixes. So again, let's do an A/B test with the volume control kind of balanced out. Here we go, off. On. So you can hear now that that initial kind of excitement of what the mix sounded like has balanced out a bit, but we're still retaining that colour. We've still got that lovely low end and that gorgeous sounding sheen in the top end. So take a listen again. Off. Bit duller. And so let's bring the MEQ-5 into the chat and see if we can do anything with this. I wouldn't use this often actually on a master bus, but let's just see if we can do anything with the mid. So first of all, let me take everything down to 0, and we'll keep this as 0 for now. So it's got no vocals in it at the minute, so like taking that into consideration. But let's go to kind of like the core mid frequencies: 500, 700, 1 kilohertz. Let's start at 500. I'm just going to boost and just see what happens. Sounding muddy. Let's go up. So just by testing those out, I'm using my ears and it's telling me nothing is sounding better. If anything, the sound is degrading. So, for me, I know that I don't need to use those controls. So that's fine. You don't have to use, every plugin on everything just for the sake of it. And then I'm going to go to my other peak up here. Now, I've already boosted at 12 over here. So, I can take a look at 1.5 and 2 where the vocals would typically sit. Let's see. Again, to me, what I'm basically doing actually is just going around each one and listening to the impact of the sound. And as I'm going round, again, I'm not hearing a dramatic improvement in the mix. So again, we'll take that down to 0. Now let's see if there's any frequencies we can cut, which might help. So going around 200 is usually a good place to look, because a lot of bass frequencies are hanging around at the tail end of 200 hertz. You have your snare has a lot of power in this area, and a lot of the lower frequencies for things like vocals, pianos, guitars, synths can all sit there and cause masking. So just doing a little cut around this area can help kind of free up a mix and add a bit more clarity. So let's just see if it makes a difference, because remember we are now cutting these frequencies at 200. Try 300. Like it there at 500. Just in my chain, I'm just going to tuck it before the EQP-1A, just to make sure that they are in the order that I would want. Let's do on and off with the MEQ-5 off. So it sounds a bit hollower. I'm just going to turn down the impact a bit. So it's just cleaned up a bit of those mid frequencies where a lot of the synths are kind of, sitting. And so it just, adds a bit more clarity. But as I said, I tend to not use the MEQ-5 for dramatic stuff, because most of the mix that you do kind of deals with the problems of having excessive mids, etc. And then just really to say that, the Universal Audio one for me is just the pinnacle of this emulation, and it is just brilliant and everything that you would want in a Pultec emulation. However, Universal Audios can be on the more expensive side, so a very reasonable alternative could be the Waves Puigtec EQP-1A, which you could probably get this for about $30 because they do so many offers. And what I will do, I will put the links to both of these plugins in the comment section for this video, so that you can go directly to these plugins if you want. As you can see, it looks a bit different, but the controls are all in pretty much the same place. There are a couple of helpful additions though. So, we have our boost, our attenuation, we still have 20 to 100 Hertz. We still have our bandwidth /Q, which goes from sharp to broad, 0 to 10. Our high frequencies, 3 to 16. And our boost there for that. And then we have our attenuation for, again, 5, 10 and 20. We also have these controls here, but to be honest, I just don't generally put that in off if I were to use this plugin. And then we have gain, so you can add even more volume. We had this on the Pultec, didn't we? We've got these controls here, but I think what is more beneficial with this one is you can actually see exactly what you are cutting, and it looks a lot more broader, because we only got to 12 decibels here, where we're going right round to 18, I think that says. My eyesight's very bad. And we've also got a VU meter, which is really helpful, because this will show you the boosts and cuts that are kind of happening in terms of volume, whereas you can't really see the impact on the Universal Audio versions. However, for me, as I said, this does have a slightly different colour to it than the Universal Audio ones, but that said, let's just do a replication of what I just did on the Universal Audio, and we can compare. So let's take this down by roughly, it's going to be 3 decibels, I think, is what that equates to. So I've probably taken that down a bit much on there. So yeah, we only want about 1.3 reduction. And then what have we got? So we've got a boost of just over 3. That's the other good thing. When you click on this Waves one, you can see the precise gain you're adding. It's just useful to know that. And we've got 60. This one's at 0. The bandwidth, as always for me, between 3 and 4. And then we're going to boost around just over 6 decibels at 12 hertz. I'm going to keep the mains at 0. Bring this down. Okay, make sure the Pultecs are off on the universal audio. Let's see what this does. And this is the universal audio. Waves again. And universal audio. Also, just to say, watch the peak here. You can see that red light coming on. You can see the needle and the VU meter going up into the red. So, you know, that is applying some distortion. So, you know, if I was mixing, doing this, I would be taking the volumes down, reducing the boosts and the cuts, etc. Not the cuts, sorry, the boosts, just to make sure that there's no clip in there. I don't know what you thought, but actually I stand a bit corrected. I actually think that they sounded very similar in terms of the impact. I think that still the universal audio probably just beats it in terms of sound quality, but they sounded very spookily similar in terms of the actual impact on the mix and the colour. So both companies have done a good job on the emulation. So it just goes to show that the Waves version is a very, very capable alternative to the universal audio one, and you know, at a fraction of the price. As I said, I will leave the links in the comments or the text that comes with the video, so you can click on the links and check them out. So thank you very much, guys, for watching this tutorial on the EQP-1A. Give me a subscribe on YouTube. Also check out my Instagram at Aubrey Whitfield, where I've got tons and tons of videos on mixing, production, and just all kinds of tips. And yeah, I hope to see you again soon on my channel. Take care, guys. Have a good week.